What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Dynasty brought to you by the League FFB. Today, we are going to be talking about the AFC and the NFC East. This is the last of our divisional previews. We've already done North, South, West. Now we're about to finish with the East. So let's bring our co host, MFGDs, up onto the screen here and let's start talking some fantasy football. War, how you doing today, man?
I'm good, man. Hanging in there, just living life.
I feel it. I know you're a little bit under the weather. I'm a little bit under the weather.
Yeah,
It's going to be a good show regardless. I've been trying to get all these videos done for next week cuz I'm actually going to be out there with you and we're going to be doing a fantasy football draft in person.
super excited. Super excited to uh get in there and try to win my second fantasy football championship.
Fair enough. All right, man. Well, I don't really think we have much news. We're gonna touch on this later in this video, but obviously the biggest news is that Trey Lance was traded from San Francisco, and he was traded to the Dallas Cowboys, and it was a fourth round pick in 2024, if I'm remembering correctly off the top of my head. Obviously, we're gonna talk Cowboys today on that AFC or the NFC East preview, but initial gut reactions. How do you feel about the Trey Lance trade?
I mean, we knew that things were going south for Trey Lance. I'm not surprised he got traded. I'm a little surprised he got traded to the Cowboys. Honestly, I didn't see that coming. I think there's a lot of other teams that would have been better for him, and he would have been better for. But I mean, I guess now Dak Prescott has a new backup in Dallas.
Yeah, and I think that's the best way to say it because I saw a lot of people overreacting and they were kind of saying that like, oh, this is Jerry Jones not believing in Dak Prescott, and I don't think it's that at all. I think the reality is there have already been rumors and rumblings of Jerry Jones wanting to offer Dak Prescott an extension later this year, and so I think it's Dubridge. We play with Dubridge. He said it best. He said it might be leverage in negotiations because uh, Trey Lance and Dak Prescott, their contracts are both up at the end of the 2024 season. Next year, Dak Prescott has a $61 million dead cap penalty. So good luck moving on from Dak Prescott if you think you were going to move on from him. He's locked in to be the starter in my eyes through 2024. But if they cannot get to a long-term deal or they cannot find even ground, maybe at that point there's the leverage of having Trey Lance as a option to pick that deal up and maybe get a cheaper contract and go with Trey Lance as your guy after 2024. So that would be the 2025 season that you're looking like that for Trey Lance. So to me, it's leverage, it's insurance, but it doesn't affect the way that I look at Dak Prescott right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think I was reading something where one of the scouts who scouted Trey Lance said that he should have never been drafted when he was drafted in the first place. 19 career games in college. They fell in love with the attributes. He's big, he's fast, he's strong, strong arm, and but at the end of the day, he just didn't have the experience and the reps in college, and it didn't translate over to the NFL. Maybe he'll get to where he's a serviceable backup in the future, but right now it just looks like that's the ceiling for Trey Lance.
Yeah, and you know what? When you look at it from Trey's perspective, I feel like this was a really good case scenario for him. I mean, you get to go play behind Dak Prescott, learn behind Dak Prescott, who is a solid veteran quarterback at the NFL. He's had success at the NFL level, and Trey Lance could play similarly to what Dak Prescott is at the NFL level. So it's kind of greener grass on the other side of the fence, and gets to learn from a guy who's done it really well. And um, I think it's a win-win for both Dallas and for Trey Lance.
Yeah, I agree.
So, all right, man. Well, that was the only news. I'm sure more news to come. And if you guys are unfamiliar, we are recording this on August 27th. So, if news comes out between now and Wednesday when this episode drops, obviously we're not going to cover it here, but I will keep the little disclaimers in the description like we've been doing because we've had a few of those pop up. But, War, what do you say we get into the AFC East here?
Let's do it.
All right, man. So, as usual, we will start with the projected win totals. We go from the lowest projected win total to the highest in the division. And so, because of that, we are going to be starting this episode with the New England Patriots. They are projected to win a total of 6.5 games here, War. They are coming off of a season last year where they won 8 games. How do you feel about the win total, and how do you feel about this team here that has a few new additions in Juju Smith-Schuster and Mike Gesicki on the roster, and even Ezekiel Elliott on the roster as well? So, how do you feel about this team?
I didn't know Jasicki or Juju were still alive, but I think I can see the Patriots winning more than 6.5 games. Seven, I think they'll win seven. Seven sounds about right, maybe even eight. Here's some good things about Mac Jones in the offseason. It seems like he might be able to take a small step forward. So, I mean, whatever that means for him taking a small step forward, I don't know if that just means more competency in the playbook, in the offense, um, or whatnot. But I feel good about them winning 7, 8 games.
Yeah, I think 6.5. It's tough to bet against Bill Belichick when it comes to win totals being that low. The only argument that I would put in favor of it going under that 6.5 games would be that the division they play in this year has gotten pretty tough. Some new look New York Jets, Miami Dolphins, and obviously the Buffalo Bills. Those are some pretty good teams. There's very few divisions that could have 3 playoff teams. This is one of the ones that could have 3 playoff teams. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But as far as the 6.5, I mean, I really wouldn't be against them going over. However, they do have a few guys being drafted here in the Superflex ADPs, top 200 on Underdog Fantasy. Their first guy being drafted off the board is Ramondre Stevenson. He's coming off the board as RB9. Mac Jones, as you just talked about, being drafted as QB 28. And then they have Juju Smith Schuster as wide receiver 53. Ezekiel Elliott is running back 52. And Hunter Henry is tight end 26. So Mike Gesicki doesn't make this list. All the other wide receivers not named Juju don't make this list, but both of their backs do. How do you feel about the ADPs here for the Patriots, and how do you feel about this team as a whole for fantasy football?
It's a disgusting team for fantasy football as a whole. All those guys just look like guys I like to have on my bench. Ramondre, I still got some hope for Ramondre, but Zeke being there definitely muddies the waters. Like I know a
Yeah.
lot of people still say, "Oh yeah, Ramondre, he's still a running back too." Not to me. Not to me. To me now, Ramondre is like a weekly flex, but I don't feel good about their pieces
Yeah, I mean
in terms of
when
fantasy.
yeah, no, I mean I agree. I mean, just looking at Ramondre Stevenson, he's being drafted as RB9. Last year in fantasy points per game, he was RB10 with 14.7 points per game, and that was with Damian Harris on the roster. I don't see much of a difference between a Damian Harris and an Ezekiel Elliott. I feel like both of those guys are going to perform pretty similarly, and it's not necessarily a knock on Damian Harris or Zeke. I think it's just where they're both at in their careers right now. But at the end of the day, I really think that I think Ramondre is kind of being drafted at his ceiling. RB9 off drafts doesn't feel like there's a lot of room to go forward. I mean, I don't project him to be a top 5 back. Do you think he can be a top 5 back?
Ramondre, absolutely not. Not anymore. I think that I feel like Zeke will do a little bit more than what we're expecting because they could have went out and signed a guy similar to Damian Harris. There was a lot of other guys who have a similar profile to Damian Harris. If you just want to have your run of the mill running back that can spell Ramondre, but they went out and got a guy who's probably going to expect to see a decent amount of touches.
Yeah, I agree, and I think primarily Zeke will be used on that goal line. I think he's going to get a lot of goal line touches. He profiles to kind of be that back for them. And I'm just looking back at the game log here for Ramondre Stevenson. Last year, only had 3 finishes on the entire season in the top 5 as far as a single week goes. So not a lot of top 5 finishes for him. it's just I don't know if it's a bet that I'm willing to make. When I look at some of the guys in the same tier as him, there's just a couple guys that I would rather go. But I do kind of want to shift over and talk about Juju Smith-Schuster because, like I said, he's the only wide receiver for them coming off the board, and he's being drafted as wide receiver 53. Again, you see it here on the screen. Um, I have Juju Smith-Schuster is one of my highest percentage drafted players on Underdog Fantasy so far this year. Um, I have Juju at 31% on 31% of those rosters. So I am pretty heavily invested into Juju Smith-Schuster. And I think a lot of the reason why I am is because coming off the board as 53, but projecting to be the wide receiver one on his roster, it's just a really low price tag to go get a wide receiver one on a team, even if that team is going to be bad or maybe have low passing volume. When you're getting a guy coming off the board as wide receiver 53, who last season, even on a bad year, had 11.6 fantasy points per game, good for wide receiver 35. Getting him at wide receiver 53 is just too much of a value for me to pass up in these drafts. So I really do like Juju Smith-Schuster. I don't necessarily like the talent of Juju, but I like the value of Juju in drafts this year.
Oh yeah, I think that's pretty good value for him. I mean, it pretty much comes down to can he produce a little bit more than Jacoby Myers produced? If he can do that, then I think you're getting something good with Juju there with that value for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And then how do you feel about Ezekiel Elliott as running back 52?
Crazy though, how the mighty have fallen, right?
It is.
It's crazy. I think that's good value for him. I think he's going to do a little bit more than what people expect. I like that value for Zeke. I wouldn't mind having him on the bench as a guy that I don't have to depend on, but maybe he's just there. Yeah, I think
Mhm.
that's pretty decent value for him as well.
Yeah, he's being drafted in the same tier as guys like Dante Foreman, Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson, Zamir White, Chuba Hubbard. Like that's kind of where he's being drafted, and I feel like he has more upside than all of
Pretty
those guys.
bad. Yeah, that's pretty
Yeah.
bad.
And then last but not least, let's just talk about Hunter Henry. Are you drafting Hunter Henry on rosters this year? I don't have a lot of Hunter Henry. I'm not really into what he's going to do this year, especially with the addition of Gasicki.
Hunter Henry hasn't been on my radar for like a few years now. I'm surprised he's even in like the top 200.
Fair enough. All right, man. So I think we agree. Ramondre Stevenson is probably overvalued. Zeke and Juju are undervalued, and then Mac Jones is just who Mac Jones is for fantasy football at this point, right?
Yep, decent run of the mill quarterback too.
Fair enough. All right, man. Well, let's go over to the New York Jets. They kind of have a new look, and you see the guy holding the jersey there, newest edition. Leaves the NFC North, goes over to the AFC East, and joins the New York Jets. They have a projected win total of 9.5 wins. Last year, those Jets won 7 games, so they're projected to go 2.5 more. You're gonna have to, if you're gonna bet the over, you're gonna have to bet that they're a 10-win team. How do you feel about the Jets, and how do you feel about this core that they have here because they've been loading up this offseason?
I think they're probably going to not be able to get to that win total. Um, no, I'm just kidding. I think they're going to beat it. Just
I
wanted
do
to
too.
throw a little shot at Brett there. I actually think 9.5 is being very, 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 very cautious. That's being very cautious. I mean, honestly, if I was going down to the sports book, I would bet that. I would take that number for sure. To me, if they can't get 9, if they can't get 10 wins, it's been a colossal failure for everything they've added this offseason. Um, would you agree with that?
No, I really agree. I mean, I think 9.5 wins is what they're expecting to do. That's probably low for them because, like you said, they've kind of went in. They've added Aaron Rodgers. They've added Dalvin Cook. They've added. I mean, they have an elite defense over there in New York. Like they were a top 5 defense last year, and they didn't lose anybody really. So it's a team that's looks like they're trying to go all in and win that Super Bowl, and they're going to try and rely on Aaron Rodgers as a veteran quarterback who's done it before. They want to try and go get one. So I think 9.5 wins is probably for them on their low end of their expectations. So I would bet the over as well. I think this is just a really good football team.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're in agreement here. There are hard knocks that are talk the town right now. They're the flavor of the month. They're the best tasting donuts in a box of donuts. So I mean, we're gonna see what they can
Yep.
do.
Yep.
9.5 though, they should be able to do that with these.
Yeah. So some of the guys here that are being drafted in this top 200, and again, these are underdog ADPs. Aaron Rodgers is the first guy off the board for the Jets. He's coming off the board as QB 16, followed by Garrett Wilson as wide receiver 8, Brees Hall as RB 12, Dalvin Cook as RB 32, Alan Lazard as wide receiver 56, and Tyler Conklin as tight end 25. All of those guys cracked the top 200 here for the New York Jets. Um, how do you feel about these fantasy football options? Are there guys on here that you're targeting? Are there guys on here that you think are worth drafting in 2023?
I mean, the top four guys are really all that matters. That Brees Hall, Dalvin Cook, that's a really shaky situation right there. That's a huge gap too. Like we're going talking about running back 12 versus running back. What did that say?
It said running back 32 for Dalvin Cook.
Yeah, so him being like basically the worst starting running back in the NFL, even though he's not starting. That backfield, and you can tell it'll be difficult to get both of them too if you're drafting, because you're gonna get one person that takes Dalvin and the other person that takes Brees. Like
Mm-hmm.
you're probably gonna have to make a trade to get those handcuffs on your same team. So I think in most leagues, you're gonna see teams will have one of each of those guys, and neither one of them being a handcuff. That's a shaky situation. I honestly would not be leaping up to touch that running back situation. Not for my fantasy team. Garrett Wilson, he's at running back 8. Okay, so that means that not
Wide
running
receiver.
back, wide receiver 8. So that means that basically, are we drafting him to be our wide receiver 1 on our teams, or
That's what you would have to draft him to be.
oh man, I wouldn't be comfortable doing that either. And I love Garrett Wilson. Don't get me wrong. I love Garrett Wilson. I love him as much as Olave, but as much as I love Olave, I wouldn't want him. I wouldn't feel comfortable with him as my bona fide wide receiver one either. Like if I'm like, unless we are talking dynasty. If we're talking
Yeah.
dynasty, okay, and I build my team and Olave is my number one, Garrett Wilson's my number one, okay, fine. But if we're talking about a team that's like that we're trying to compete, I don't think I could win a firefight with one of those guys as my number one. My number two, yeah. My number one, no. And then we have A-Rod, Aaron Rodgers. Definitely don't want to roll into the season with him as my quarterback one, that's for sure. I think they have him graded out as a quarterback too, if he's a quarterback 16. That's what they
Yep.
have there. Yeah,
Yep.
so yeah, that's me. He's a top end quarterback too. And I think that's a proper place to put him with the idea that the wheels could fall off if we're going to see the same Aaron Rodgers from last year continuing his downward trajectory.
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you kind of my opinion on this as we run down too, and I'll throw it back on as I talk a little bit about it. But for me, in my personal rankings, Aaron Rodgers is my QB 14. So I am a little bit higher than on Rodgers than consensus. And then as you look at my running back rankings, I'm pretty actually spot on to where the community is. However, I have Brees Hall as my running back 14, so I'm a little bit lower there, but I'm a little bit higher on Dalvin Cook. I have him as a running back 30. So um, I think I've baked in a little bit of what I think Dalvin Cook will do to bring Brees Hall down, but I can't bring Brees Hall down too much further because I mean when he was on the field last year, he was electric. Um, but what I do want to talk about a little bit is Garrett Wilson being that wide receiver 8. I know you said you aren't comfortable with him being your wide receiver 1. I am. I would be more than comfortable having Garrett Wilson as my wide receiver 1 on my team this year. Redraft, best ball, dynasty, doesn't really matter the format. I think there's very few players in the NFL that have the talent and have the clear opportunity that Garrett Wilson has to see a massive target share and then have the talent to do something with that. I don't hear what I'm not saying when I say this, because I don't think that Garrett Wilson is Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson. But if there was a player in the NFL that could make that jump, I think Garrett Wilson would be the number one candidate to do that. So I don't know. It's going to have to come down to Aaron Rodgers being, um, really good at football. It's going to have to be that. And if you've made that bet in the past, you know that Aaron Rodgers can be really good at football. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think Garrett Wilson has all the talent in the world. One of my favorite players in the NFL. Um, just I'm very comfortable having him as my wide receiver one. So I think we disagree a little bit there.
Yeah, more or less, just barely though. We barely disagree on that one. I mean, I like Garrett Wilson. I mean, there's some circumstances where I would want him to be my wide receiver one, and there's others where I wouldn't. I mean, I don't think we're too far off from that.
Yeah, fair enough. And then, I mean, you said after that it's Alan Lazard and Tyler Conklin. Are you targeting Alan Lazard in drafts? I'm personally not, and then I'm personally not really targeting Tyler Conklin either. I don't really care to have either of these guys on my rosters.
Yeah, neither of those guys are on my radar.
Fair enough. All right, man. Well, let's keep going down the AFC East, and let's get to the team that is projected. Um, they actually have the same win total as the New York Jets, but I put them above them because they finished higher last year, and that is going to be the Miami Dolphins. They're projected 9.5 wins as well. Team with Tua, Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill. They lose Mike Gesicki, but they add Devon Achane. How do you feel about this roster? Really good defense as well. We were talking about how good the Jets defense is. This defense is really good too. They added Jalen Ramsey. I know he's going to miss some time, but 9.5 wins. Do you think this is a double digit team or a double digit win team? Because last year they won 9 games. They would have to win one more this year.
Yes, I do. This is real fun shit right here. I think I just like I like most of this team's pieces. I like this team's odds. I think this team could get 10 wins. Uh, there's not a ton to say. I love the Dolphins pieces. I would love to have Dolphin shares on my team. That's for sure.
Yeah, I agree, and I think when you really look at the roster, like they won 9 games last year, but keep in mind, like there was a month of football where they didn't have their starting quarterback Tua Tagovailoa on the field, and so
Yeah.
it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. He's beefed up a little bit. He told Ryan Clark to keep his name out his mouth because Ryan Clark was calling him fat, but he said, "Keep my name out your mouth," because us Samoans, they get scrappy too, and so. He was telling Ryan Clark to back off, but I think he's put on some weight. He's practiced obviously how to, it sounds weird, but how to fall better at the NFL level so he's not hitting the back of his head on the turf anymore. And I think personally, I am rooting for Tua Tagovailoa. I think Tua is awesome. I think he's going to prove a lot of haters wrong this year. And I think this might be the year that people finally stop disrespecting Tua Tagovailoa.
Yeah, I feel good about Tua. I traded him to win the league, but that had more to do with the overall goal of my team in that league. Tua is a fantastic quarterback to have on your team with tremendous upside. Quarterback one upside, I might say, if he can stay healthy, if he can deliver the ball to the weapons. Yeah, I'm in on Tua. I think I'm a little less worried about the health than a lot of other people.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I didn't have an issue with Tua at all. I wouldn't mind having him on my roster.
Yeah. So as we talk about some of the players here on the roster, Tua is the first guy being drafted off the board. He's being drafted as QB9. Tyreek Hill being drafted as wide receiver 3. Jalen Waddle is wide receiver 11. Devon Achane, RB 39. Raheem Mostert, RB 50, and Jeff Wilson, RB 54. So you got all those running backs there at the back end, but it's really Tua, Tyreek, and Jalen Waddle. How do you feel about all of these guys, and do you feel like they're all being accurately valued?
And I like the ball. I feel like they're all accurately valued. A Chain, that's kind of, I think with A Chain, it's become more relevant during the preseason. He's been playing very well in the preseason. So I'm not surprised he's above Mostert. When the offseason actually started, I was like, yeah, there's no way A Chain is going to be, the lead back there, the most productive back there. But I think there's actual chance, especially with the health concerns of Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert. Um, the other three, it speaks for itself. Two has been graded out as a QB1, basically. Tyreek could fall anywhere between the first, second, or third best wide receiver in the NFL this year in fantasy. Jalen Waddle, he's a top 10 wide receiver in my heart, but they have him as the wide receiver 11. That's fine. That's still pretty damn high.
Yeah.
Um, like I said, these weapons, just like with the Cincinnati Bengals, you want to get as many of these guys on your team as possible.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, really, when we're looking at Tua Tagovailoa and we're looking at all of these guys, like, um, you know, Tua being drafted as QB9, we've already said it, but last year in a points per game standpoint, he was the ninth overall quarterback from a points per game. So he does produce these low end quarterback one numbers for your fantasy football teams. And probably if you're in a 6 point passing touchdown league, he's going to be a little bit higher than that number nine, too, just because he's not really running the football, but he has two elite, probably, I would say probably he might have the two most dynamic playmakers in the NFL on this team. Both of these guys can house a slant from 75 yards out and take it all the way to the end zone. Like these guys are fantasy football game breakers. When you look at Tyreek Hill last year, wide receiver three in fantasy points per game, being drafted as a wide receiver three right now, it feels fine. He was putting up 20 points per game for your fantasy football rosters. And Jalen Waddle last year was wide receiver 12, putting up 15 fantasy points per game for your rosters. So all of these guys seem to be accurately represented in fantasy football drafts this year based on their performances last year. And I think year two in a Mike McDaniel system, you're going to get a little bit more familiarity. You're also going to get what I fully expect, and obviously we cannot project injuries, but I think that if Tua has a full season where he's healthy, this team is a double-digit win team. All of these fantasy football options are going to be key contributors on your fantasy football teams, and you're going to be happy with drafting any of those three guys: Tua, Tyreek, or Jalen Waddle. As far as the running backs, I think they come from a San Francisco system where they do like to run multiple guys. Devon Achane, to me, he projects to be uh, the guy with the most juice. He has track speed. He's the youngest. He has the freshest legs. They drafted him to potentially be that guy for their backfield, but I still project it to be a committee. I think you're going to see enough Mostert. You're going to see enough Jeff Wilson when they're healthy that it will be frustrating. It will be annoying, and I don't fully expect. I don't expect Devon Achane. I know a lot of people did when they drafted him in rookie drafts this year in dynasty fantasy football leagues. I don't project him to be a running back one for fantasy football this year. Like he's not going to finish in the top 12. The only way that he's going to do that is if Wilson and Mostert are both hurt and he has to take 20 carries a game. But the reality is that Achane isn't necessarily built to be a 20 carry back at the NFL level. So I don't mind where he's being drafted at, though. I will say that because he is being drafted, like I said, as running back 39. When you're drafting that low, I mean, you're taking 38 guys above him at the running back position. You're going to get a guy that probably are drafting him to be on your bench to start the season in these redraft leagues. And if there was a Mostert injury or if there was a Wilson injury, you could plug him in a flex or an RB2 slot, some weeks depending on the matchups as the season goes on. So you could get a value with Devon Achane there. And I think there's a value with Wilson and Mostert too. I think all those guys are values. I really wouldn't mind taking any of these guys on my fantasy football rosters this year at cost.
Yeah, no, I agree. And even if I was thinking about what you said a second ago, even in the event that Mostert or Jeff Wilson gets injured, the Dolphins have just gone and signed somebody. They've been trying to sign someone else the entire offseason. They still might do so. So I think
Yeah.
this whole entire thing with the backfield is in flux. But I do think, regardless of what happens, A Chain will have a role in the offense. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I will put this disclaimer out there because, like I said, we are recording this now on Sunday. It is coming out on Wednesday. Between now and then, Jonathan Taylor could be a Miami Dolphin because he is the betting favorite right now to land in Miami. If Jonathan Taylor landed there, obviously you would feel very good about drafting Jonathan Taylor too. It would probably make it to where you're not drafting Raheem Mostert or Jeff Wilson. You would probably just look at Jonathan Taylor and Devon Achane. But if Jonathan Taylor lands there, where do you think the ceiling is for him in fantasy football? I just want to project it just in case it does happen. But obviously, this is all hypothetical speculation at this point.
I think he'll still be around the same place that he is now as an Indianapolis Colt. I don't think it changes all that much. I mean, he was pretty much the bell cow in Indianapolis. I think
Mm-hmm.
even if he is in Miami, he still will have to shed a rock a little bit more than he did in Indy. But ultimately, I think he'll still be around where he is now.
Yeah, I think if he ends up in Miami, I would feel very comfortable drafting him as a top 5, top 6 running back for my rosters. I mean, there's very few guys that I would consider. I mean, it would be like the Austin Eckler, the Christian McCaffrey, the Bijan Robinson, and then at that point it would be like Saquon and probably Jonathan Taylor. Like that's where I would be looking at if he went in and was traded. Miami traded for him, but um, apparently they've made a few offers. Nothing is stuck yet because he isn't in Miami yet. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops over the next couple of days. But just keep in mind as you're drafting these guys, or maybe it happens between now and the time that this video is posted. But Jonathan Taylor could be a Miami Dolphin. But
Yep.
all right, man. Well, let's get to the number one team in this division. They've been the number one team for a few years now, but still projected to be number one. It is the Buffalo Bills. They are projected to win 10 and a half games this year. They're coming off of a season last year where they won 13 games. There is a new tight end in town. First round rookie tight end Dalton Kincaid is now there. And it looks like they're handing off the backfield to James Cook with the departure of Devin Singletary. How do you feel about this roster? Do you feel like 10 and a half wins is low considering they won 13 last year? And how do you feel about their chances of winning this division after talking about the teams that we have just talked about?
I like their chances. I had the opportunity to watch them in the preseason, their final preseason game yesterday. I can tell you, Josh Allen looks like Josh Allen.
Mm-hmm.
Stephon Diggs looks like Stephon Diggs. James Cook looks very good, very powerful when he runs the ball. So I think the offense will definitely be up to standard, if not better. 11 wins sounds really good. Sounds like something that for sure is going to happen. I think the only thing that could prevent that from happening is the New York Jets actually achieving what a lot of people think they could achieve, and the Dolphins just being juggernauts, and the Bills' defense taking a step back. Those are the only things that I think that could prevent Buffalo from getting to 11 wins, but we shall see.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I think the 10 and a half wins feels fine. I'd still feel comfortable betting the over. When you have a guy like Josh Allen playing the quarterback position, who is a top 5 quarterback in the NFL, no matter how you cut it, that's just what he is. I feel like it's a good bet to go the over, considering, where they've been at and adding a few weapons that they have added this season. 10 and a half feels fine. But I think when it's all said and done, I would put my money on them to win the division. I know it's a boring pick. It just feels like that's going to happen again. But let's talk about some of the fantasy football options that are being drafted because so far in this division, these guys do have the most fantasy football options being drafted. Josh Allen is being drafted as QB3 behind Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts. Stephon Diggs is being drafted as wide receiver 5. James Cook as running back 29, Gabe Davis as wide receiver 39, and then you have Dalton Kincaid, their rookie tight end, being drafted in the top 12 there as tight end 11, Damian Harris, RB 43, and then Dawson Knox, tight end 24. So, how do you feel about these fantasy football options? And is there anything that's really sticking out to you uh, as far as fantasy football goes for these guys' ADP?
I mean, nothing really sticks out as far as the ADP. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. There's like a couple guys, maybe one, to Josh Knox and Damian Harris. Those two guys aren't necessarily their end of the roster type guys. Josh Allen is Josh Allen. He's exactly what you say, a top three pick in fantasy football draft. Um, James Cook, he'll have the opportunity to finish above where his ADP is.
Mhm.
Like I said again, looked very well. Stephon Diggs, he's ranked perfectly, and I think he's just going to continue on unless there's some type of drama with him and the team. That's the only thing that could probably derail Stephon Diggs. Dalton Kincaid. We'll see how that goes. He's a rookie tight end, so you never know exactly what you're going to get. So I like their piece. They have a lot to offer any fantasy roster.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think obviously high expectations out of Dalton Kincaid if you think he's going to finish as a tight end one for fantasy football as a rookie. However, he is lining up outside as a wide receiver. Sometimes it seems like they are going to utilize him kind of more as a receiver, and they're going to use Dawson Knox in those 12 personnel lineups. But the thing is, they said when they drafted Dalton Kincaid, and again, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that Dalton Kincaid is going to be Travis Kelce, but they said that they needed to find Patrick or Josh Allen's Travis Kelce as what he is to Patrick Mahomes. So it looks like they're trying to replicate a little bit of what the Chiefs have done in the past with this Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes connection, and now they're going to try and do it with Josh Allen and Dalton Kincaid. So um, they are trying to replicate that a little bit. That is good news to hear because the way that Travis Kelce is utilized in the NFL is very beneficial for fantasy football. So if they do use Dalton Kincaid that way, it will be beneficial for fantasy football. Maybe not as a rookie, but definitely long term. If he's used that way, that'll be great for dynasty fantasy football teams. The only thing that I would say as I look at the rest of these guys, and I'm going to specifically talk about Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, and James Cook, is Josh Allen. I think I know it's a very minuscule change. He's my QB2, and I don't think that there should really be a discussion as to why he shouldn't be QB2. I mean, coming off of two number one quarterback finishes in 2020, 2021, and then last year being QB3 from a fantasy points per game standpoint with that injury that he suffered to his elbow. A lot of people forget about that, but he did have a injury to the elbow. He just runs the football. He throws it deep. I mean, the reality is he's a fantasy football monster. He just scores so many fantasy football points. And to me, he's my QB2, and I wouldn't change it. I'd be drafting Mahomes and him. And I would even consider drafting Josh Allen ahead of Patrick Mahomes. Probably a hot take, but that's just what I would consider this season. And then as I look at Stephon Diggs, I think he's accurately represented. Last year was number 6 overall from a fantasy points per game with 18.9. I expect him to do it again this year. He's just a lock for 100 plus receptions and um, you know 1,500 yards every year. That's kind of like the thing that Stephon Diggs has been doing ever since he went to Buffalo. I feel very comfortable with that. And they haven't. I mean, it's still Gabe Davis opposite him, and it just doesn't move the needle for me at all. And then as far as James Cook, I'm going to bring it back up because he is being valued as RB29. I have been on record on this channel in the past saying that I think that James Cook was a value, and I said that I think he could be a breakout. And since then, I wouldn't classify him as a value. I think he is being accurately drafted, but I still think he can break out for fantasy football. I currently have him ranked as my RB27 in my personal redraft rankings this year. I have him in the same tier as your DeAndre Swifts, your Javante Williams, your Rashad Whites. But this offense is a good offense that is going to score a lot of fantasy football points. And if he does catch the football like I project him to catch the football, we could have a situation where he does break out for fantasy football. So definitely somebody at that current ADP that I am targeting on drafts. You're probably drafting him as a RB3 on your fantasy football rosters, maybe even an RB4, depending on your build. And if you do that, I think there's very low risk in that pick, but the potential for him to outperform that is good enough that you will be very happy if he does break out for fantasy football.
Yeah, I agree. I've liked James Cook the entire offseason. I think he's one of those players that could be a league winner for you if the chips fall the right direction. Yes, I'm totally with you there on James Cook. I also want to mention, as far as Gabe Davis, I think that his position is a little bit in threat, more threat than people know because you got Khalil Shakir back there. So we'll see. Shakir might offer a little bit more in terms of diversity and the way he can receive the ball than Gabe Davis. So we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I mean, I don't have anything else to say. I think Damian Harris is a handcuff. If you play in a best ball format, you could draft him because there could be some goal line work there. And then Dawson Knox, I think we're going to see him be outproduced by Dalton Kincaid. So at this point, I'm not really looking to have Dalton Knox on my fantasy football rosters, especially in single season format leagues. Maybe in Dynasty, you can go buy him low because when he becomes a free agent, he probably goes to a team where he could become a starting tight end again. Um, but right now, as is for single season formats, I'm not really looking at Knox.
Yeah, that's the knocks on Dawson.
Fair enough. All right. Well, let's go over to the NFC East. These are the last four teams that we will be previewing. We've previewed everybody else so far. So let's hop over here. And we're going to be talking about a team that I think has some good pieces, but they are projected to finish last place in the division. They are projected 6.5 wins. And this is your Washington Commanders. They are projected 6.5 wins here. I know I just said that, but they finished the season last year with 8 wins, now projected 6.5. They do have a quarterback change. They're moving on to second year quarterback Sam Howell, and still have the same receiving core: Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel, and the same running back group with Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson. How do you feel about this team? And I think this win total is really going to come down to how you feel about Sam Howell as a quarterback. Interested to hear your thoughts here, War.
I think they're going to fall short of 6.5 wins. And it's not necessarily that Sam Howell. I think Sam Howell will do decent. I think I mean, to me, he's still a developing quarterback. So him going out there and having like that Brock Purdy, Mac Jones type of season where he's like a slightly above average game manager, I think that'll be fine. I like Jahan Dotson. I like McLaurin. I am curious as to whether or not they could get to where Dotson surpasses McLaurin. We shall see. Do not like their running back room. Do not like the backfield. I think all those guys are mid. Um, that's pretty much all I have to say about the backup running back. So really, what you're looking at when you're looking at this team, you're looking at Sam Howell, McLaurin, Dotson, and to a lesser degree, Curtis Samuel.
Fair enough. Well, it's tough for me, and it's tough for me to decide whether I want to go over or under. But if I broke down, my thinking behind it, it's really just that it's a tough division, and I think that the division games for them are going to be really hard. I do think Sam Howell is going to be successful as a quarterback at the NFL level. Really, really liked Sam Howell at North Carolina. Was surprised when he didn't get the draft capital that I thought he could have, because I thought there was a real chance that Howell could have been the QB1 in the class. So it was shocking. It was really off putting. Made me not really want to have Howell in a lot of my dynasty leagues, but um, now it looks like he's going to have an opportunity, and I hope that he shows everybody what I saw when he was at North Carolina. But when it's all said and done, it's going to come down to those two things. I think Howell will be good, but it's a tough division, so maybe that 6.5 is going to be a little tough to come by. When I do look at the ADP options for this team, again, these are super flex ADPs from Underdog Fantasy. Sam Howell is being drafted as QB 26, so pretty low risk there. Terry McLaurin as wide receiver 26, Jahan Dotson as wide receiver 34, and then you have Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson as RB 31 and RB 35. Curtis Samuel is wide receiver 73, and Jacoby Brissett is QB 34. I would personally knock Jacoby off this list because with Sam Howell being declared the starter, I think Jacoby is really just a worst case scenario at this point. So he's not somebody that I'm looking to draft. But out of everybody else, how do you feel about the ADPs? Gibson and Robinson are very close together, and McLaurin and Dotson are very close together. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that, War.
I mean, I think that's right. I mean, I'm with you on Brissett, by the way. I think you're right about the grouping together because I think with both of those, their running back and their wide receiver position, I think either guy that's the backup or alleged backup could surpass the other. So I think both of those groups are close. Curtis, then you got Curtis Samuel as like a distant third. Um, I'm fine with the ADPs. I wouldn't mind having any of those guys on my roster. Most of them on the bench, yes, but for the most part, yes. Terry McLaurin is a starter. Dotson may be a starter. So I think if anybody's star has fallen a little bit, it's McLaurin. I think he takes a step back this year. I don't know what you think about that, but I think he does. I think that you're going to see more so of the Sam Howell, Jahan Dotson show. That's just like my opinion on it.
Yeah, I mean when you look at it, like Jahan Dotson is primed for a breakout. Like if there was anybody on this team that was going to break out for fantasy football, it will be Jahan Dotson. So he would probably be the popular bet there. The connection of Jahan Dotson and Sam Howell has looked good in preseason. Sam Howell has looked good in preseason. And when you look back at last year, the one start that Sam Howell got, he scored. He was just shy of 20 fantasy points per or 20 fantasy points. He had 19.3 that week. So was fine for you in fantasy football the week that he started. You hope that with that and what you've seen this preseason, and then obviously having the weapons that he has, because these are some pretty good weapons around him. And then add in the offensive coordinator change to Eric Bieniemy from the Kansas City Chiefs. Hopefully all of these things add up to a point where you are comfortable having Sam Howell as a quarterback on your fantasy football roster. Maybe he's just your backup quarterback. If you're in a super flex league like these ADPs are, maybe he's your QB3. But there is a chance where Sam Howell, I think, could outperform his ADP. He's coming off the board as QB26. Like you said, he could have a Brock Purdy like season pretty easily over here in Washington. But when you talk about Terry McLaurin and you talk about Jahan Dotson, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out because Terry McLaurin is battling an injury right now. He is battling a toe injury. Um, if he misses time to start the season, uh, it could give you a little bit more time to have that Jahan Dotson and that Sam Howell connection continue to grow. And if it does, I think this could be a very split wide receiver room. Maybe there's not a clear alpha. And I do like Terry McLaurin. I think Terry McLaurin is very, very talented. But I think at this point, we are fully aware of what Terry McLaurin is. In 2020, he was wide receiver 20 in fantasy points per game, wide receiver 29 in 2021, and wide receiver 22 in 2022. So at this point, he is a low end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3 for your fantasy football rosters. He obviously has the upside of winning you a week here and there when he does catch those long touchdowns. But I think with Jahan Dotson here in this wide receiver room, that is what he is for you, and he's being drafted as such. And so it is what it is with Terry McLaurin. Jahan Dotson's going to take a step forward. Last year, fantasy points per game was wide receiver 38. I don't expect him to finish that low this year. I would expect him to be at least 30 or higher this season. So that's really my thoughts on the receiving room. But as far as the running back room goes, it's something that I don't really know what I want to do with at this point because uh, Brian Robinson, he's really a early down grinder. He's not going to catch a lot of receptions. Um, and I know there's a lot of hype on Gibson, and maybe I'm just sour to Antonio Gibson at this point. But last year in fantasy points per game, he was running back 28. The year before, running back 17. The year before that, running back 16. Um, if Antonio Gibson is going to be valuable, it's going to have to be coming, or it's going to have to come from the receiving game. Is that something that's going to happen? I don't know, because when we look at what Kansas City has done over the last couple of years, where Eric Bieniemy is coming from, they don't ever have a guy. They have a committee, and I could see Brian Robinson being Isaiah Pacheco, and Antonio Gibson being Jerick McKinnon, And if that is the situation, you probably lean Jerick McKinnon. If you're in a PPR league, and if you're not in a PPR league, you probably lean Isaiah Pacheco. So it's going to be interesting to see. But I think this is a full fledged committee. I'm not really super high on either of these guys.
I feel like that's honestly the perfect way for you to eloquently put it in terms of their backfield. That you have Pacheco and McKinnon in Robinson and Gibson with Eric Bieniemy instead of Andy Reid. And I think that's the perfect way to put it. And I think that's how we should all view it when we're building our rosters and thinking about drafting these guys. That's probably exactly how it's going to be broken down.
Yeah, and when you look at it from a football standpoint, not from a fantasy football standpoint, just from a real life football standpoint, that is the best case scenario for the Washington Commanders. Like if they have Isaiah Pacheco and Jerick McKinnon like numbers from these two guys, that is a successful run game for this team. It will be successful for their offense, and it will be their best formula for wins and success in this division. So they don't give a damn about your fantasy football teams. I know we do, but we just have to project what is going to happen in real life and see how it will project into fantasy football lineups. And that's just what I think will happen this year. So,
I
do you have
agree
anything? Okay,
100%.
cool. All
I
right.
agree
Well,
100%.
let's go over to the number 3 team in this division, and they are going to be projected 8.5 wins. It is the New York Giants. This is a playoff team that did beat my Minnesota Vikings last year, so a little bit salty about that. But at the end of the day, they were able to bring that core of Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley back to the team. Both were free agents this offseason, but they did add Darren Waller and Jalen Hyatt, as you see them on the screen. This team last year won 9 football games, so they are pretty much projected the exact same this year. How do you feel about the New York Giants, and how do you feel about this core for their outlook for this season with that win total?
I don't like it. Oh my! I know I definitely don't love it. Kind of don't like it. The outlook. I feel like if the Commanders are at 6.5, I feel like the Giants should be 7.5. I don't know. I don't know how they pulled off the stunt they pulled off last year with making it to the playoffs. I don't know how they beat Minnesota. I don't understand any of that. I understand they added Darren Waller, but Darren Waller was on his last legs in Las Vegas. Dave Jones, don't believe in him. Jalen Hyatt, he's a wide receiver in a room full of wide receivers, apparently. Then you got Saquon, how healthy is he? I mean, I just don't see 8.5. Okay, we can say that, but I can also see them winning 7 or 8 games as well. So, I mean, I definitely wouldn't feel comfortable taking them at 8.5. I'm sorry, New York Giants. That's just where I'm at.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's belief in Brian Dable. It's belief in what he did, in a part that I guess is still to be seen in the development that he played into Josh Allen. Um, can he do that type of development with Daniel Jones? I don't know. Daniel Jones has looked pretty good in the preseason, but I think you said it best. Like their wide receiver core is very, very fragile, in my opinion. It's very unpredictable, and it seems like they're doing a wide receiver by committee over there in New York. It's very interesting to see. The defense is average. Being a 9-win team in this division with the Dallas Cowboys and the uh, Philadelphia Eagles, it's probably going to be tough. I'm not sure just off the top of my head who they play outside of the division, but like I said, last year they won 9 games. Can they do it again? Sure. But it's just as equally in the range of outcomes that they're underneath that. So I'm not very confident betting the over with this team, but there are some fantasy football options on this team that I do like, and there are some that drafters like because they're being drafted very highly. Daniel Jones is being drafted as QB 14. Saquon Barkley is RB 5. Darren Waller is tight end 5. And then you have Jalen Hyatt and Isaiah Hodgins rounding out two wide receivers for this lineup as wide receiver 74 and wide receiver 76, just cracking that ADP in the top 200. But there is a bunch of other guys that are not in this top 200 that are there as well. So I'm interested to hear your opinions. But for the most part, I really only care about the top three. So how do you feel about those guys? And how do you feel about this team for fantasy football?
We are on the same page. I think Daniel Jones is a quarterback too. Saquon is a top five running back, and Darren Waller is a top five running back. I think all those things are projected accurately in the ADP and the rankings of the position. Those other two guys do not care about them. Um, Darren Waller in a league where tight ends are hard to come by. I mean, I know we said there's a little bit of a tight end renaissance going on right now. They're going to have to knock Darren Waller off the mountain. He's not going to give up his spot. So I mean, yeah. So he's a tight end five. If you have him on your team, it's more than likely you're starting him at tight end. Um, Daniel Jones, I've just never been a fan, but he is a quarterback too. Well, what can I say? And even with Saquon, yeah, he's a top five running back, health permitted. So, yeah, I don't have any problems with where those guys are ranked. And I think from as far as the other two guys, you could just throw a whole glut of guys in there. We don't know what order they're going to be using these guys, so we just have to see.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, with those two guys, there's Darius Slayton in the mix, Sterling Shepard in the mix, Paris Campbell in the mix, Wandale Robinson. Like, there's a bunch of guys that could end up being the number one wide receiver for this team. Obviously, they drafted Jalen Hyatt this year, so you would think that they want him to be the number one wide receiver for this team, and he's being drafted as so. But it really would not surprise me if Darius Slayton is the wide receiver one for this team at the end of the year. So I think for the most part, I'm not looking at any of those wide receivers. I'm not trying to draft any of those guys. But as far as the top three that we were talking about, I have a few points that I want to make about each of them. So we'll start with Daniel Jones. Uh, being drafted as QB 14 in these drafts, I think is what it said. And last year, from a fantasy points per game standpoint, he was QB 10. So it'll be interesting to see if he can replicate that. I don't know if there's much more of a ceiling to Daniel Jones. I don't ever see him being a top five fantasy football quarterback, but I think being that low end QB1, high end QB2 for your fantasy football rosters is kind of where he's going to land. Obviously, I enjoy the fact that they added Darren Waller because that does give him at least a weapon this year in the receiving game to throw to. Because last year there wasn't really anything at all. But with that being said, I guess let's talk about Darren Waller because Darren Waller, the ADP scares me a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. Being drafted as tight end five, it makes me nervous because that means you're drafting him above guys like I've seen him going above guys like Kyle Pitts. I've seen him going above guys like George Kittle, Dallas Goddard. Like I've been seeing him go above guys like that. I was in a draft last night and he went above TJ Hawkinson. He was the tight end 3 off the board. So a lot of people are very high on uh, Darren Waller, and I guess I don't fault you because he should see a massive target share in this offense. The biggest worry for me is obviously the health. Darren Waller hasn't played a full season of football since 2020. If you're unfamiliar, we were in COVID lockdown the last time that Darren Waller was healthy for a full season. So that was a long time ago. I think the reality is the bread and butter is going to be how is that target share and the amount of receptions he's going to get. I just worry about, um, I guess, the fact that he's being drafted at his ultimate ceiling at this point because I don't see a world where he's going to outproduce a Kelsey or an Andrews. Um, and so at this point, he's kind of being drafted at that high of a ceiling. I just am not really into it. I would rather, 2, 3 rounds later, get a George Kittle or get a Kyle Pitts and have some room for improvement there. So the ADP does worry me a little bit there. And even if you go back to 2021, like he wasn't even top 5 in fantasy football points per game, and he's being drafted there right now. So 2 years where he's been out of it. But Saquon Barkley, very accurately represented. Last year, played in all 16 games. He looked the part. He was top 5 in fantasy football points per game with 17.8. This year, in my personal rankings, I have Saquon Barkley as my running back 4. So just after Eckler, McCaffrey, and Bijan, I have Saquon Barkley right there. So I think he's being drafted accurately. I think he's going to, obviously, if he's healthy, which he showed last year that he could be. And when he was, he looked fantastic. This offense is going to be built around him. I know I just said they added Darren Waller, but they are still building this offense around Saquon Barkley. He is the most powerful weapon that this offense has. And he caught a lot of footballs last year, too. He had 57 receptions. I expect that number to stay pretty similar. Very, very confident in drafting Saquon Barkley at his current ADP this season.
Yeah, I have no arguments there. Saquon, if he's healthy, he's awesome. Simple as that. Another point on Darren Waller, yeah. Once you start talking and I start actually remembering the other guys, because it's hard to remember the tight ends other than the big, the Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce's of the world. Um, but when you mention it, yeah, not taking him. I mean, do you want to play the game?
Yeah, we could play the game of guys in the range.
Yeah.
And I don't think he's very far off of it, but I'll let you be the pick. But let's just go through the top like 7 or 8 guys at the tight end position. You tell me. And at the beginning, it's going to be very easy for you. Travis Kelce or Darren Waller?
No.
Mark
Oh,
Andrews,
see,
Darren Waller.
look. Well, yeah, no. It's
Okay.
just like the start of
Hawkinson or Darren Waller?
Hawk.
George Kittle, Darren Waller?
I like Kittle. I'm a Kittle fan. Yeah, Kittle.
I like Kittle too, especially with Purdy being the starter. Kyle Pitts or Darren Waller?
Pitts.
I'd do Pitts because of the upside. Dallas Goedert, Darren Waller?
That right
It's where it gets
there.
close.
Yeah, to me, that's the comp right there. Dallas Goddard, Waller. And that's a coin toss for me.
I think Goddard has the higher floor, but Waller probably has the higher ceiling.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Goddard's the safer pick. And then it gets down to some of your favorite tight ends after that. It's going to be like your Evan Ingrams, your David Njoku's, your Pat Fryermuths.
He's
So
better.
I don't think he's like crazy overvalued, but the difference between the difference between a Darren Waller and a Kyle Pitts or a Dallas Goedert is a whole round, sometimes a round and a half. And so if you can punt it, a round and a half and get yourself an elite wide receiver, an elite tight end, an elite running back, and then you still get Kittle, Pitts, or Goddard just a little bit later, I think I like the build more when I do that because the difference is you pass on a guy like, let's just look at the ADPs right here. You pass on a guy like Deontay Johnson, Christian Kirk, Mike Williams, Brandon Ayuk to grab Darren Waller. And then instead you have to draft a guy like Brandon Cooks, Quentin Johnston, George Pickens, Elijah Moore. Like I would rather have the Brandon Ayuk and Dallas Goedert than I would have the Darren Waller and Treylon Burks.
We're the type of guys that kind of try to find value in the tight end position anyway. So
yeah,
drafting him high is just sacrilegious.
And I've said it multiple times, man. I've said it on the show. If you follow the show, if you follow the best ball drafts that I've been in, I've been doing best ball live streams all the time. Like I have a very, very, very firm rule where 90% of the time, if I'm not getting Kelce, Andrews, and then sometimes I will consider Hawk in that top 3. He's worrying me a little bit right now with he's not practicing a lot, so it's worrying me a little bit. But if I'm not getting Kelce or Andrews, I'm just gonna punt it till later, or wait until one of those mid tier guys like Goddard, Kelce, Evan Engram. If one of them falls to a point where they become a value, then I will consider taking them. But at current ADP, it's the top 2 for me, and then screw the position. I'll get somebody late.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're better off doing that when you're putting your team together than wasting a higher pick on a guy who might get hurt and who might not reach his potential.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to the team that is projected to finish in second place in this division, and it is going to be the Dallas Cowboys. They have a projected win total of 10 and a half games, coming off of a season last year where they won 12. Dak Prescott, Tony Pollard, CeeDee Lamb, and new wide receiver Brandon Cooks. Dalton Schultz is gone out the door. Turn it over to Jake Ferguson at the tight end position. How do you feel about this team? And obviously the departure of Ezekiel Elliott. And how do you feel about this win total of 10 and a half games?
Something just doesn't sit right with me about that win. So they're not going to get 11 wins. Like, come on. Come on. They're not getting 11 wins. I mean, the other team, to me, they're just like a slight step above the Commanders and the Giants. I mean, I think it's going to be a runaway train with the Eagles, and Dallas isn't going to be close to neither of the other two teams. The Them having 11 wins, I feel is just another case of Cowboy leniency, where they try to put the Cowboys in a winner circle every season. So yeah, I don't see them reaching that win total at all.
I disagree with you. I think they are an 11 win team. And I think there's been a lot of Dak Prescott hate lately that I think people forget how good of an NFL quarterback he is. I know he's not necessarily the greatest fantasy football quarterback for you, but at an NFL level, he's been pretty good. I know last year led the league in interceptions, yada yada yada. I don't expect that to happen again. Um, when it's all said and done, this team has a good offensive line. They have an electric running back in Tony Pollard. They have good wide receivers in CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks and Michael Gallup. And they have a good quarterback in Dak Prescott. Top it all off with a very, very good defense with Micah Parsons, Trevon Diggs, and a lot of other guys on that defense as well. So I think this team can beat the Giants. I think they can beat the Commanders, and I think that they can find themselves into 11 wins. Last year, like I said, 12 wins. They could do 11. You see a little slight regression, and they still pass that 10 and a half. Just feels like it's pretty accurate. And I know usually I don't like going over on these double digit win totals, but I think this is a good football team, and I expect them to be a playoff team this season.
I mean, yeah, I expect them to be a playoff team, a fight for the wild card. I just don't see double digit wins for them. I think they're more of a 9-win team, and it's not Dak Prescott like exhausted. I think Dak Prescott is a fairly good quarterback. I mean, I just don't see the Cowboys being like this double digit win team. I can't exactly tell you why, but I just don't see it, man. I just don't.
Fair enough. Well, let's talk about some of the fantasy options for this team because uh, currently being drafted in the top 200 here in Superflex ADP on Underdog Fantasy, Dak Prescott is being drafted as QB 11. CeeDee Lamb is being drafted as wide receiver 7. Tony Pollard is RB 6. Brandon Cooks is wide receiver 42. New quarterback Trey Lance, QB 33, which just off the bat, I do not, like I said at the top of the show, I do not expect him to be relevant at all this season. So that ADP is irrelevant to me. Michael Gallup is wide receiver 59, and then Jake Ferguson, their tight end one, or projected tight end one, at tight end 22. So, how do you feel about these guys? I think for the most part, I only care about Dak, CeeDee, Pollard, Cooks, and Gallup. I think Gallup should be included in that. What are your thoughts there?
I mean, even with those guys you named, that's a pretty deep list, right? Like you're going like what 4 or 5 deep with the
Yeah.
players. I think that's a pretty good list. I think definitely rosters should look to put the Cowboys on their team when they're drafting. Can you pull that up for me one more time so I can
Yeah.
see? Um, Dak at quarterback 11, right outside of the top 10. If you could get Dak as your quarterback too, that's amazing value, in my opinion. CeeDee Lamb is a top 7 wide receiver. That's also that sounds about right. Tony Pollard, I know everybody's high on Tony Pollard, but I need to see it to believe it. I know he did his thing last season, but a top 6 running back, I mean, we'll see, dude. I mean, I don't know about that. Brandon Cooks at wide receiver 42. Brandon Cooks almost always delivers. He's always going to do something for your roster to um, put points on the board, even if you get him as a flex. Michael Gallup, man, I'm not a big Michael Gallup guy. He's disappointed me way too many times for me to even think about rostering him.
Yeah, I think the value on Michael Gallup is fine. I mean, you're drafting him in like almost as the 60th wide receiver off the board. At that point, like there's so many guys there that just are not going to be relevant that I'll take a guy who has shown at least flashes before. Um, but I think you're right, man. Like when I look at the redraft ADPs and those guys, it's pretty spot on. Dak being drafted, like you said, low end QB1, high end QB2 feels accurate. Personally, in my rankings this year, I have him as my uh, QB 13. So they're drafting him a little bit higher than I have him, but I have him as a QB or a high end QB2. Um, CeeDee Lamb being drafted, and let's keep talking Dak for a second because last year was QB 13 in fantasy points per game with 17.8. So that was with throwing a league leading interceptions. But like I said, I don't project that to happen again. When you look at CeeDee Lamb, last year was a top 7 in points per game. He's being drafted in the top 7. I think that's you're drafting a guy to be the wide receiver one on your fantasy football team, and you're very comfortable drafting a CeeDee Lamb to do that. And I'm just like you with Tony Pollard, man. He's being drafted as RB6 on Underdog in these drafts. Um, I get he did his thing, like you said, and he looked good. When you go to the fantasy football points per game, he was averaging 15.6 fantasy points per game, which was good for running back 8. I know Zeke has left town. Um, there's a very real opportunity and possibility that RB6 is accurate and Tony Pollard is a top 5 back at the end of the year. That's a real possibility. I personally have him as my running back 9. Some of the guys that I have above him are obviously your Austin Eckler's, Christian McCaffrey's, Bijan Robinson's. I have Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, Nick Chubb, Jonathan Taylor ahead of him. But I have him in the tier with the Derrick Henrys, the Joe Mixons, the Ramondre Stevensons of the world. So I think he is going to be a running back 1 for your roster. If you draft him to be your running back 1, you will be happy. There's a chance that he outperforms that, but RB6 feels very close to the ceiling. It feels very close to the ceiling.
Yeah, that group that you have him with, I feel like that's the perfect group. That's like the we'll see group. Like Derrick Henry, can he keep beating Father Time? We'll see. Joe Mixon, can he still keep being productive for the Bengals? We'll see. Ramondre, is he going to get enough touches? We'll see. He's in the we'll see group. Like I,
Yeah.
I'm definitely not taking him above no freaking JT and like some of those other guys you named. That's egregious. Where's Najee Harris on the list?
On my list, I have Najee Harris as running back 13 right now. He is the top of my tier 4 running backs, and that tier is Najee, Brees Hall, Travis Etienne.
Yeah, I'm not like. Would I be surprised if Pollard is around there? No, I wouldn't. I mean, I need to see it, man. This guy has never been the 100% full carry the workload running back before, and that's basically he's going to be, unless you're thinking about Deuce Vaughn coming in there or Rico Dowdle coming in there doing something. So, yeah, I'm not. That's horrible value to me. I don't know if that's horrible value. Him and running back 6 not doing it, and I feel like only a Cowboy fan would take him that high. Like personally,
Fair enough. I think for me, like as I continue working down this list and I look at guys like Brandon Cooks and Michael Gallup, because I said I would draft both of them, I still believe that. I think your value is going to be in Brandon Cooks. Coming off the board as wide receiver 42, he is very, very consistent, guys. Like when you go and you look at the career of Brandon Cooks, um, since 2015. That is a long time ago, guys. Since 2015, he has had 6,000 yard seasons for a total of like 3 or 4 different teams. So now he's going to the Cowboys. I project him to slot in as the wide receiver 2 on this roster. Um, I think it's pretty safe to consider him a 1,000-yard receiver, or at worst, like an 800, 900-yard receiver. And if he did that, he would probably finish in the top 30 for the fantasy football wide receivers. So getting him at wide receiver 42, I think there's room for him to be a value. And just to give you some numbers to actually put some concrete evidence to that, last year for the Texans, he played in 13 games. He averaged 11.2 fantasy points per game and went for 699 receiving yards. That's some of the lowest that we've seen in a while for Brandon Cooks. And he was wide receiver 37. So last year being some of the worst numbers we've seen from Brandon Cooks in years, he still outperformed that ADP of wide receiver 42. So I do think that there's a value on Brandon Cooks in your drafts this season.
I love Brandon Cooks, dude. Like he's like the perfect guy to just come in and like, and I'm talking like he's actually a player on the physical team in like real life, but he's the perfect guy to come in and step in whenever you need somebody. Somebody's on a bye week and you need a wide receiver three, call Brandon Cooks. You need a flex guy to come in there, call Brandon Cooks. 1-800 Brandon Cooks. He comes right to you. He gets the job done.
I mean, he's good for 10 points. Like it just feels like he's good for 10 points every week. And sometimes that's what you need on a fantasy roster. So I think there's a chance he's a value for you.
Absolutely, absolutely, positively, freaking Louie.
All right, man. Well, let's get to the last team, and you see the colors in the background. That's what I did it for today. So let's talk about the number one projected Philadelphia Eagles. They were a Super Bowl contender last year. They're projected to win 11 and a half games this year. War last year coming off of a season where they won 14 games. Obviously had a chance there to come home with a Lombardi, just fell short to the NFL MVP and Super Bowl MVP, Patrick Mahomes. But this is a very, very, very good football team with very, very good fantasy football options. Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, Dallas Goedert, Devontae Smith, DeAndre Swift now in the building. Very, very top offensive
Smith,
line.
Swift.
How do you feel about this team as a whole? How do you feel about the win total of 11 and a half? Do you think they're going over?
This team, how I feel about this team as a whole. Look, I have to copy off here. Let me throw the green line on the background. Different shade of green, but it's still green. Um, how I feel about this team as a whole. Sky's the limit. They can win 16, 15, whatever. Like, I definitely have them being like the top three highest win totals in the entire league this year. Um, that's pretty much it, man. This team is on. This is a Super Bowl runner-up. I know there's like this idea that teams who lose in the Super Bowl struggle the season after. I don't see it. I think this team's going to hit the ground running.
Yeah. I think again, just like you said, this is a very good football team. I think I mean if I'm betting my money, I'm betting them to win the division. So um I don't think the 11 and a half is bad. Can they be a 12 win football team for sure? Definitely in the range of outcomes. But as far as fantasy football goes, and as far as the options that you're going to have to make decisions on when you're drafting your fantasy football teams this year, we're going to be talking about some of these guys. And with an ADP of 2.0 as QB2, you got Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown, wide receiver 6, Devontae Smith, wide receiver 13, Dallas Goedert, tight end 7, DeAndre Swift, RB 24, Rashad Penny, RB 37, and Kenneth Gainwell, RB 47. So it looks like there's a mix of running backs there at the bottom, but very, very top fantasy football options in Hurts, Brown, and Smith, and even Goddard for your tight end rooms. How do you feel about the ADPs of these guys, and where do you want to start talking about?
I don't want to control the direction of the talking points for our video here, but I think the top four guys are solidified. Hurts, AJ Brown, Smith, Goddard, those guys are all ranked properly. Those guys are ranked properly, and I don't think we got to reinvent the wheel on here for that. I think what really needs to be discussed is backfield because I'm all over the place. This backfield. There's a part of me that says, "Oh yeah, DeAndre Swift's going to set the world on fire." When he's not setting the world on fire, Rashad Penny's going to be setting the world on fire. Gainwell, we can just throw him out with the bathwater. Um, But Penny and Swift, oh man, like I'm all over the place with those guys. Like at one point, I worry about both for their health. At the other point, it's like they're in this Eagles offense, this dynamic Eagles offense that likes to run the ball. What are they going to do with that? So I mean, those are the guys that really will determine where your team is going to rank at the end of the season because it's obvious that we're all going to take AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Jalen Hurts, Dallas Goddard. We're all going to take those guys for more or less where they're supposed to be taken. But if value is down on Swift, you get Swift at a good spot because the rest of your league mates are worried about his health, and then he comes in and he's dominating in the Eagles offense. Now you got a potential league winner, and it's going to be whoever is carrying that rock for them, whether it's Penny or Swift. It's going to be this these two guys. Unlike who are we talking about earlier, Zeke or Ramondre, you can get these two guys on the same team in your draft, and it's highly recommended you get both of these guys. Gainwell, I don't look at Gainwell as a viable option in terms of if health hits the team and the team goes down. Um, if Swift and Penny happen to get hurt, which is definitely in a range of outcomes, definitely a range of outcomes because it's just history with both of those two. The Eagles
Yeah.
will go out and sign somebody. They're not going to give Gainwell the ball to say, "Hey, it's you're the captain now." Like so, um, I think those are the guys that will make the determination on whether or not you have success or failure in your fantasy season.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, I'm just going to bring it back up because RB 24 for DeAndre Swift, RB 37 for Rashad Penny. Um, it's tough, man, because I've been working on my running back rankings for redraft leagues, and um, I understand in previous years, like DeAndre Swift last year was top 15 in fantasy points per game, top 8 the year before, top 15 the year before. Like, but that was with a different roster. That was with a team that wanted to run the football a lot. And this team wants to run the football too. But it's hard for me to project DeAndre Swift. But you're totally right. Like, he has the ability to be a league winner at this current ADP. He can massively outproduce this if they decide that he is the guy for them. Currently in my rankings, I just don't. I think I have him right where he's being drafted at. I have him at like 25, and he's being drafted as like 24. So I have him right there. But like when I'm looking at the list, I think it comes down to confidence, and I have a hard time drafting Swift over like an Alvin Kamara, even though Kamara has a 3 game suspension. But we've seen Alvin Kamara still be productive. Like, it's just tough for me to do things like that, especially when they have Rashad Penny and a Kenneth Gainwell who could, see some work as well. Um, but when you look at the other options here, I mean, you said it. You're comfortable drafting Goddard at the current ADP. I don't have much to disagree with there. I think I feel the exact same way. But Jalen Hurts last year was the number one quarterback in fantasy football points per game. He was averaging 25.6 fantasy points per game last year. And that's because of the addition of A.J. Brown and obviously the rushing upside that he had and some of the rushing touchdowns that he got as well. 760 rushing yards for Jalen Hurts last year. Phenomenal season. Some could argue that he could have been MVP. I still would have voted Mahomes. I think Mahomes earned it, but he was definitely in the running there. As far as the receiving options, AJ Brown last year finished top 8 in fantasy football points per game. He had almost 1,500 yards and 11 touchdowns. Devontae Smith last year, top 15 in fantasy football points per game with almost 1,200 yards and 7 touchdowns. So it seems like AJ is the touchdown guy. He's also seeing more of the receiving yardage, but do not discount Devontae Smith by any means because he actually saw more receptions than AJ Brown. So if you play in a PPR league, maybe consider that. But I think these guys are being drafted accurately because AJ Brown 6, Devontae Smith 14. I mean 13. Um, yeah, you're drafting wide receiver ones and high end wide receiver 2 in Devontae Smith for your fantasy football rosters, and that's where they belong. It's going to be a good offense. It's going to be a good season. You're going to feel good if you have those guys on your roster. Um, I really don't have much more to say about that.
Me either. like I said, this is another one of those teams like the Bills and the Bengals where it's like get as many of these guys as you can. I mean, not me personally because I don't like having studs from the same team, but get as many of these guys as you can, and you can't go wrong because these guys are going to perform, and that is a guarantee. It's a fact of life.
Yep. So feel good about those fantasy options. Like we said, Swift could be a potential league winner. Penny could be a potential league winner. It's going to come down to who gets the ball and how much. But as far as those top options go, Hurts, Brown, Devontae, Goddard, all of those guys are going to be solid pieces and very good pieces for your fantasy football rosters. So that is the last of our divisional breakdowns where we have done the AFC and NFC North, the AFC and NFC South, the AFC NFC West, the AFC NFC East. We are all done. We've
We
completed it
did it
all,
all. We
all
did it
32
all.
teams. So that is it for those. And we have one more show before the NFL season starts. And I have a proposal for you, War. I think we do a 2023 My Guys episode where you bring me 3 guys that you were all in on this year. You're labeling them your guys. We probably know one of them already. And then I will bring you 3 of my guys and we discuss our guys for the 2023 season on the next episode of Let's Talk Dynasty.
I love it. I love the idea. Let's do it. My guys, let's do it.
All right, My Guys episode next episode of Let's Talk Dynasty. And then we have real football that we can actually talk about. All this preparation will finally have come to life. It'll be time to start scoring points and chasing championships. But Ward, do you have any last minute thoughts? Anything for us before we get on out of here?
I don't, man. I'm super excited for the season to come up, man. The live bullets are really about to start flying, and I'm ready to go.
Yes, sir. The time is here. So if you guys enjoyed the video today, go ahead and give us a like on this video. It's the best free way to support the channel. If you want more fantasy football content like this, consider subscribing. Content like this is coming out every single day, short form, long form, really however you want it. We're putting out content like that. And we don't have anything else for you guys. We will see you on the next episode of Let's Talk Dynasty, where we will discuss my guys. But until then, peace out, guys.